We're going to be switching gears very quickly now to another matter, which we already did tell you about, happened right here in the Federal Capital Territory, a much-awaited, make no mistake, it was also in the invitation, a much-awaited book launch of the former military president, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, was launched here in the Federal Capital Territory. It was a moment of many revelations, a moment to also express some regret as to what had happened in 1993 when elections were annulled. But, I mean, that was the highlight of the event. Listening to the very, very masterful review done by Nigeria's former Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, quite a lot to take out of that particular book launch. But right here in our studios, we have someone who knows very closely the former military president. We have with us Mr. Kasim Afegwa to tell us a little more about why it's taken this long to get this book from the former military president. Mr. Afegwa, it's good to see you this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Better late than never,
they say.
Some of us who are quite close to him, we've told him repeatedly before now that he needed to put, and capture his own history in his own words, so that posterity will judge him based on that, and they will also have rich information about what factorized some of the decisions he took while in office. And with pressure from different quarters and all that, he finally succumbed. And 32 years later, just like you said, at least he has written his own autobiography in his own words. The book may not capture the entire gamut of what his 8 years represented, but it's a good opening to appreciating, his trajectory while in office.
What do you think that the regret which he expressed yesterday, what does it do for the country?
I think whatever he said about June 12, regret and missteps, has been said repeatedly, but his voice, has been drowned in the cacophony of voices against that particular action. He has said before now that in interviews and interactions with people that it was better to take a bad decision than not to take a decision at that period and that he accepts full responsibility for whatever happened under his watch. And so the book is just speaking to a few details here and there. And we should allow him. He's a human being, human error. He has accepted the responsibility as leaders will do. And he has also given us additional information about, issues that came up with respect to June 12. There are quite a number of issues in the book, but the June 12 issue has become a thorny issue, such that it's almost like, obliterating, his lovely and very wonderful achievements while in office. So when people just pick out the June 12 issue, it's understandable because it has remained so. It has become, a recurring decimal. And now that we are hearing from the horse's mouth what transpired, if you marry what he said with what Professor Humphrey also said in his book with respect to the role played by certain actors, essentially General Sani Abacha of blessed memory, will understand the rationale for his own position.
Former President Olusegun Obasanjo, while he was speaking at that event, actually mentioned the fact that there will be fallouts. Expectedly. Yeah. And one of those fallouts is what you just mentioned now, the late General Sani Abacha factor. And if you read parts of that book, you will see where, even though he did take responsibility for June 12th, it did come across like he was making it look like, look, I take responsibility for it because I was in charge at the time, but there was a lot of things that happened that I didn't have control over. That's how it seemed.
Of course.
And I think that snowballed into a question of this man, because we were alive, Mr. Afegwa. This man was not a weak person. This is not someone that things would be happening and he wouldn't know. I think that's one of the issues on social media, at least, that we're seeing. What do you make of that? That dichotomy that people are noting.
No, it's not a dichotomy. You see, the point must be understood. I think we are taking IBB to be a democratic president, and the answer should be no. He was a military president who got to office by coup plotting, right? And so when you plot coup with your contemporaries, your colleagues and friends, you must, as a matter of necessity, know how to balance power. Because don't forget, it was part of the Buhari coup, and in 20 months, Buhari was torpedoed, was removed from office by him. And so when you now have your colleagues who are also angling for that, there were other coups before, after that. There was the Vasa coup, there was the Gideon Oka post. So you don't take absolute decisions in a way that will offend the sensibilities of those who are your contemporaries, but for whom you have become their #1 citizen. And so military government is very delicate and sensitive, different from a democratic government where you go out to seek for votes and all of that. I used to ask him, I said, the box should stop at your table. When you were in Castina, when there was a test statement saying that June 12 had been annulled, you hardly came back to Abuja. And when you came back, why didn't you just, strike out that particular release and say, no, the thing should continue? He looked at me and he laughed. He said, I was running a military government. When things happen like that, when you have different cells within the military circle, you are no longer you may be called the chief of, like the commander-in-chief, but the real commander-in-chief are those bodyguards who are carrying guns to protect you. It might also be your own nemesis. So he has to balance the algorithms of power in that sense.
You mentioned his legacy. I think maybe I'll send it to you later. There's a whole list that's going around right now of all the things that General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida did while he was in office. And it's amazing. Some of the things that we look at in the nation's capital today, everything is almost tied to him in some way or the other. And it really got me thinking about the concept of a legacy and for the leaders that have followed after him, and the concept of a statesman. Now, you've worked with, you were his spokesperson. As someone who did a lot of those things and also has this checkered part of his story, how do you speak to a leader right now, someone who's in power, about how to balance out being a statesman who everyone loved and, like you said, having to take some decisions that may not really go well for your legacy? How do you balance that out? I mean, talking to today's leaders.
Well, today's leader is a democratically elected leader. Under the military, you don't have National Assembly. So it's completely, eroded. In this present dispensation, democratic dispensation, there's balance of power, the executive, legislature, and the judiciary. And so, in the military, it's almost unheard of for the courts to rule against what the military got despot or.
So are you saying that democracy is in the way of progress?
Of course.
Are you saying democracy is in the way?
Democracy has come to stay in this country. And we must continuously ensure that despite all the imperfections, people should take home the lessons of June 12. And what are those lessons? Lessons of credible, free and fair elections. People keep talking about, if the most are judged credible. Why are we not conducting credible, free and fair elections in this dispensation? Why must we settle electoral disputations in the law courts? There are Supreme Court governors, there are senators from Supreme Court, there are all kinds of. So politicians must learn to absorb, the shock of defeat. They must learn to ensure that, this democracy sustains, endures, and survives by ensuring that they bury their own selfish, parochial, and pecuniary interests for the national good. If you play a football match, it may not be the best of outcomes based on the opportunities of goal scoring. And the referee may take a decision that is not in your favor. At the end of the day, it won't stop the outcome of that particular football match. But you must accept as players that, this has come and gone, let's move forward. So electoral reforms, very important. How much of compliance are we ready to, adopt those reforms substantially that will deepen the conversations around good democratic conduct? And so, for a Babangida, for example, you can't take it away from him. I was amused when I heard Dangote said, IBB created the private sector we're talking about in Nigeria today. That's a good recommendation. How many of that kind of scenarios or policy formations are we ready to engage in under a democracy, going through a robust discussion at the National Assembly and all that, to move the country forward? That should be agitating our minds at all times.
You know, it's interesting, Kayla, just to buttress your point, you know, I'm trying to remember whether it was, you know, the head of state that said, the former head of state that said it, or Senator, I beg your pardon, former President Nana Akufo-Addo, who was talking about engineering a country. He wasn't just there to, you know, govern the people. He was there to engineer a country. And maybe it's no surprise, you know, some of the achievements that were being reeled out. But what I find very interesting, I'm sure a lot of people also found it interesting, Professor Yemi Oshibajo pointed it out in a very humorous manner while he was, you know, talking about the circumstances, the complexity of our country. I'm going to read what he said. He says, it's not just a story of the remarkable journey of the former president, Ibrahim Babangida, to the highest levels of public office. It's also the story of a nation, our nation, the Nigerian story. Complex, sometimes unpredictable, sometimes stranger than fiction, but always fascinating. He says many of the key figures in this book who shaped the history of our country are here with us today, demonstrating something truly unique about Nigeria, our ability to move beyond the past and come together. And then he talks about, you know, how General Yakubu Gowon was there.
How his ranks were restored, even though he knew that IBB was part of the coup of 1975.
So people who remove people from power were seated right beside each other. And, you know, it looked like we've moved beyond the past, you know, or they have moved beyond the past. But the country continues to bear the consequences of their actions.
You see,
how do we reconcile that as a people?
No, at a point, military coup in Africa and West Africa was fashionable. I think we have gradually moved beyond that now, except for some of our neighbors who decide to, you know, brought the hand of the clock backwards. I'm talking of
Niger,
Mali and all of that. Okay. But essentially, democracy has become fashionable in Africa and West African sub-region. And to that extent, we must try to play politics of no bitterness. And politics of no bitterness will help us to overlook certain imperfections and look at the bigger picture of the country. For those of them who fought the Civil War, like IBB, for example, what he suffers today is actually a consequence of the Civil War. He received bullets, shrapnel in his lungs, a bullet pierced through his nerves, and, you know, at some point he just...
In other words, there were consequences.
So, yeah, so for him, they want to see a united Nigeria. They want to continue to see that there is a justification for fighting war of unification. Since a certain part wanted to exit, they said, no, don't go, remain with us. And for those of them who suffered, they want to see a united Nigeria that no matter how imperfect, we are better together as one than for us to go our disparate or separate ways. And so the upcoming politicians and even the existing ones must put, you know, into heart the interest, the larger interest of the country. Because when the country survives, then we can pursue our collective and individual aspirations without let or hindrance. But when we continue to agitate and want to alter the apple cart in a way that will also undermine the system, then the problem becomes heavier.
So the books are available at Roving Heights and where else? Because I'm sure a lot of people want to
It's just Roving Heights.
Between yesterday and today, the kind of phone calls I've gotten, the kind of requests I've gotten, a lot of people want to purchase the book. And I've just spoken to the coordinator, Dr. Yemi Ogunbiyi, who had given me a directive of where to go to, you know, to get more copies of those who have been asking me since yesterday. And I think shortly it will be on the bookshelves and maybe on the streets.
I think Mr. February, where we will have problem with you today is if you didn't bring.
No, I didn't.
That's where
I say aye.
That's where we have problem
I
with you
didn't
today.
bring a copy, but
you're not going again.
I can assure that I will get one across.
You can assure us?
I can assure that I will get one across.
We'll take that.
It's quite an intriguing documentation, and I think people will gain a lot of insight into the man IBB.
We'll take that for this Friday morning. Thank you so much for coming on the program this morning. Mr. Kasim Afegwa is a former spokesperson to former military president Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. He's also chieftain of the APC.
Thank you.